Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second in our John P. Imlay Jr. series, Junior Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. I am excited for tonight's chat, and we are joined by two people that many of you may know. The first is Dr. Rich DeMillo, who is serving as the Interim Chair of the New School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. And many of you who are alumni may remember him from his time as the Dean of the College of Computing. And our featured speaker tonight is Mr. Kabir Barday, who's a GT Computing alum, also one of the Alumni Association's 40 under 40 honorees for this year, and maybe more importantly, the founder and CEO of OneTrust. So I'm going to turn it over to Rich to take over for tonight's chat. Please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function in the platform if you do have questions for Rich or Kabir as we go through tonight's talk. So Rich, it is all yours.
Great, thank you, Jen. Hey, Kabir. Thanks for being here.
Hey. Yeah, excited to share the story with the audience.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Let's get into it. There's a lot of information I want to pull out of you tonight, but let's kind of get into it right away and talk about OneTrust. Tell us about OneTrust. I was looking at adjectives that have been applied to OneTrust, and they all make it sound like you just showed up yesterday. You're in startup years. You're like middle aged. 2016 was your founding date. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Really, I started in March 2016 is when I quit my full-time job at AirWatch to start OneTrust. It was called ZenTrust when I started it, and then in June we renamed to OneTrust, and that's really when the journey really started. So 4.5 years.
So anything beyond 18 months, you're beyond adolescence as far as I'm concerned. You're one of the you're one of the big dogs now. Let's get into it. So, tell us about OneTrust. Who are you? What's this industry about? I'd love to hear your origin story. There's a lot of stuff that we want to talk about. What makes an entrepreneur like you tick, but tell us how you got into this through OneTrust's point of view.
Yeah, so when I started OneTrust, it was really about privacy. And what I started noticing is I was working for a company called AirWatch that recruits heavily out of tech as well. And what AirWatch did was mobile security, bring your own device for company security. So we built a software that could monitor employees' phones for security vulnerabilities. And I learned about this unintended consequence of privacy when you try to do really benign things in security. So to monitor an employee's phone, for example, for security issues, you have to know the list of all the applications they have installed. So, what are good apps, bad apps. But if you just think about what apps you have installed on your phone, it can start to reveal medical conditions. There's apps for every single one of those. Religion, sexual orientation based on the dating app you use, financial. So it's all these really sensitive categories of information. And now your IT department's seeing it. Who else is seeing it? How can they make, discriminate and make all these decisions that can cause problems? And I learned that our customers at the time at AirWatch, this was in 2014-ish time period in Europe, they were really struggling to deploy a software like that because of privacy. And I started learning and studying what does privacy mean, because I didn't really understand the concept. I know what it meant to me personally, but from an enterprise governance perspective, I didn't understand it. So I started learning that there's all these privacy regulations that were emerging. And when I would read the privacy regulations, I would really notice that in order to comply with these, it requires this operational reform in a company. You have to change everything about how you collect data, how you communicate data, how you're transparent about it. When I looked at solution providers in the market, it was only lawyers and consultants. So I thought I had a business opportunity there, and I started working on it. And the idea iterated several times, and I can share the story as well. And so it really started around, how do we help companies protect the privacy of their customers and employees in order to comply with these privacy laws? Now, what's happened as we've grown OneTrust is we realize that privacy is one piece of a broader puzzle. When you think about why do companies invest in privacy, it's because they want people to trust them. They want their employees to trust them, consumers to trust them, customers to trust them. So as I started thinking about how we grow and become a category defining, public, 20, 30, 40, $50 billion company, we realized there was a bigger opportunity here to create and invent an entirely new category of software that helps companies be more trusted. And it was very timely because millennials and Gen Z, or I call it Gen Zoom, they make buying decisions differently than previous generations. They buy on trust and ethics and responsibility. So we ended up broadening our vision into being really the enterprise software that's the fabric of trust for an organization, a digital organization. And that involves privacy, information security, data governance, ethics and compliance, all these different aspects that we bring together. And so we grew from when I started, June 2016, from 0 to 1,500 employees, a $2.7 billion valuation, and according to our investors, probably the single fastest growing enterprise software company in history. And so that's been really excited, especially the fact that it's a do-good business. It's meaningful work about trust and respect. So that's part of the story, Rich.
So it's kind of inspiring, actually. I mean, I'm listening to you describe the opportunity, and I get it from an end user standpoint, from an employee standpoint. It takes a certain amount of altruism on the part of a company to think that far out and invest in privacy. You don't normally think of enterprises as operating with that kind of worldview. So, I mean, how do those first sales work? How did you get in the door?
So you're exactly right. If it's strictly doing the right thing, you're going to have some companies invest, but it's not really a market. And what created the market initially was a law in Europe called the GDPR. And the way the GDPR was written was, number one, the fines were substantial, 4% of an entire company's revenue. The requirements to comply were extremely operational and specific. And the scope of GDPR, it was a European law, but scoped to any company globally that had a person in Europe's data. Because of the GDPR, it almost created this trade war of privacy regulation, because whichever country had the strongest privacy regulation, guess what? That's where all the cloud SaaS vendors wanted to have their data center, because it's easier to put your data center in the strictest, and then you can do business everywhere. If you have your data center in America, then you can't go the other way. And so you can't go take all the data in Europe and put it in America. It's easier to put American data in Europe. And so it created this kind of commercial problem and trade problem. And what started happening is all over the world, privacy laws started to pass. And so the interesting thing about the market is the reason different countries pass privacy laws is fundamentally different and rooted in history. And this is the really interesting part. So in Europe, they pass privacy laws because they believe it's a fundamental human right and because it's deeply rooted in history. So Nazi Germany, Mussolini, massive government data surveillance, and then people would knock on the door and put you in a camp and kill your family. And that's what happens with data misuse of sensitive data. So Europe started from a human rights perspective. The US, it's more of a commercial issue, right? Privacy became a commercial issue because the big tech companies actually wanted the US to pass laws because it helps them compete at a global playing field. Otherwise, everybody's going to want to use a European company. So the US passed it for a commercial reason. In Asia, they're passing laws because privacy is about respect and saving face. That's part of the Asian culture. And so for different reasons, this kind of massive proliferation of privacy laws has happened. And the bottom line is there's nothing that creates a market than a law that has teeth in it that says you got to do this. And, we were early on in the market and we scaled faster than anyone else. and we just dominated the market and competition.
And you can almost see it in a place like Georgia Tech, which isn't enterprise employees, and we're public, but we have the same restrictions as any other enterprise. You can see the realization just kind of sweeping through the university. The number of different business units within Georgia Tech that didn't even track GDPR all of a sudden find themselves in this compliance problem. That must be a common thread in big corporations.
Yeah, it starts as a compliance problem, but at some point, the organization has an aha moment and realizes that this can actually become a real competitive advantage for them. And that's where our job gets fun. And usually the turning point is, they do the baseline for compliance. And by doing the baseline, you actually find out that it's actually harder to operate your business because you have to start getting consent for all your data, which means your marketing activities tank. You have to start doing privacy reviews before you go live with any new business activity. That slows down R&D and innovation. But companies that invest in doing it right can actually speed up R&D cycles, collect more data, use more data, because they just understand the rules and they're doing it confidently. And that's the fun part, is when you see the light go on in a customer's head to see this is strategic, this is important. And it's also important to our employees and customers from a brand perspective. And that's when you're able to, in a compliance-only market, companies want to spend as little money as possible. In a market that can actually help you differentiate and add business value, that's where we can really make real money.
Yeah. So I was working for HP when recycling became a big deal, which so disposing of all this toxic stuff was a cost of doing business, and all of a sudden, the companies that did it became companies that did good and did well by doing it. So I mean, these things are sort of built into the business models, even though you don't realize it at the outset, I guess.
And by the way, Rich, I have to call you out for being very humble in how you say you worked for HP. You ran the entire end. You ran hundreds and hundreds of engineers. So
it ran me, but yes, thanks for that. So speaking of roles, so here you are, the founder of this fast growing company. You're getting lots of accolades, and you hear all these stories about founders who go through the series of transformations of roles within the company. What are you doing in OneTrust? Has your role changed over the months and years, and where do you see your role in the company going forward?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it has to do with what your skill set is, what the gaps you have on your team. It's kind of how your role evolves. And so when I started, I was really doing a lot of the product management myself because I understood the regulation and I was designing the product. And I also spent a lot of my time in sales because at an early company in an early market where you're just getting started, and we weren't the only ones. I had dozens of competitors starting at the same time. Your customers don't buy from your company. They buy from you. So if you can look your customer in the eye and say, I'm going to be there for you. We're not going to increase our prices. We're going to deliver on the product. Yes, we're early, but we're going to get there. And here's why I'm credible, because of my background and because I'm personally on the line here. That's why they will buy from you, especially in an early market. And so your name and the company's name are not different brands. They're synonymous. Now, as you scale, you graduate out of that problem where your brand as a company becomes so significant that you don't have to be the one looking someone in the eye. You can have references from other customers that'll say, this is a company that delivers. And so that's what you try to do to graduate yourself from there. And then if you get bogged down into product as a founder, yes, it's important to always be close to the product for sure. But if your full-time job is designing the product, you're never going to understand the bigger picture of how do we grow the company? And so for me, it was always about, number one, why are we losing? That was always my number one job. Why are we losing, and how do we stop that? And what do we need to do next? That's always what drove me. It was, this cultural mindset of there are people that hate to lose and there are people that like to win. Liking to win doesn't make anyone special in this market. You celebrate the wins and you bury the losses and you don't talk about them. Hating to lose means I don't even remember the wins. There's just too many of them. I can remember every single loss and we'll diagnose it, obsess over it, and that drives our roadmap and company strategy. And then you have the funding and investment to back it up. So the strategy, the analysis of why you're losing, the goal setting of where do we want to be as a company and what's the steps and roadmap to get there, that's more of what I'm doing today. And a big part has to do with how do you think about your culture? How do you think about organizational management around goal setting? And how do you continue to build your brand as an organization and enter new markets? So that's kind of how I've evolved. Now, if and when we become a public company, you spend a lot more time doing, investor engagement and these types of things as well. But I don't think a lot of the strategy really changes.
Yeah. I mean, the phrase everyone needs to be a little paranoid, I guess.
Yeah.
Really applies, right?
Oh yeah.
So tell us about how you got here. I mean, first of all, where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Born and raised in Atlanta. So I grew up in Alpharetta for the most part, and went to a high school called Northview, and then went to tech straight from there. And it was a natural choice and fit for me. But what was interesting was when I was in middle school, I was probably maybe 12, 13, 14. My parents enrolled me in Gwinnett Tech Community College in adult education to learn PHP, HTML, and Flash. And they set a goal for me. They bought this learn to type, what was it called, Mavis Beacon, to learn to type, the program back in the day. And they made me learn how to type at 60 words per minute, right? And they, set a milestone. They rewarded me for that. So I really got into computers and coding and programming at an early age. And the challenge, though, as I continue to code and program, I did a computer science major at Georgia Tech, was that I didn't see a path as an engineer myself to scale, because I constantly felt like I was having to execute on the code rather than understand it and direct it. So I quickly started to, when I graduated from tech, I really wanted to get a customer-facing role. So I did technology consulting at AirWatch. But the entrepreneurship journey, I have a few slides I'll share here, Rich, to kind of walk you through really how I learned about a lot of this. And so let me just share my screen here.
So you were preparing these 3 questions, right?
Yeah. Do you see the screen?
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. So, what I always tell people is as part of your journey, you can engineer your outcomes. You don't necessarily have to get lucky and stumble on the right idea at first. I went through horrible ideas before I landed on the right idea for OneTrust. But as I was growing up, when I was at tech, that's really where I wanted to learn a lot about entrepreneurship. And I studied abroad with Merrick First, who runs Flashpoint, and learned about his concept of startup engineering. And it just opened my eyes that, you don't need $1 million to go start a company, and you don't necessarily need to quit your job. You can start incrementally iterating. And one of the most interesting talks I had listened to was a guy named Jim Beach. And his startup was just a phone number. He spent almost no money, and it's just a phone number, 1-800-FUN48, and an ad in a newspaper for $20 to see how many people how many parents would want to send their children to summer school at MIT in his case. for IT classes. And he just waited for the voicemail box to fill up to know he had a market. And it's the most brilliant, minimal viable product I've ever seen. And so I started learning about this concept of the lean startup and customer discovery. These are some books that really guided my journey. And while I was at Tech, I joined not only the entrepreneurship curriculum at Tech and the different startup hackathons and seminars and books to immerse myself in that environment, but I joined a group in Atlanta called TIE Atlanta and had all the first mentors I had that still have evolved into friends today. And man, I went through horrible ideas, and I won't go through all of these before I really landed and iterated on the idea for OneTrust. So, it was a very, I would say, engineered specific process for me. And I tried to utilize a lot of resources to just be ready when I stumbled on the right opportunity.
So I've heard you say before, you don't have to get lucky to succeed. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the concept of, if somebody wants to start a company, if you approach it with a mindset of constantly iterating, constantly validating your idea, constantly listening to the market, and not just listening to what customers say, because they'll point you in the wrong direction sometimes, but listening to where customers are going to spend money. I had so many people when I started OneTrust tell me what I had was a great idea, and I'll show you actually some things I worked on when I was starting OneTrust. Let me know when this comes back up, Rich.
Yep, you're there.
So when I first started, I knew I wanted to do something in privacy. So I launched this application to help build privacy policies for employee phones. And what I learned is this was a feature, not a company, right? So I realized that there just wasn't a big enough market to have a multi-billion-dollar company. But I knew that privacy was important, so I iterated a little bit. And I built this TurboTax product for privacy. And what I did is I'd go out and I just send LinkedIn messages to chief privacy officers. And I talked to ExxonMobil's chief privacy officer, all these different people. I just sent a LinkedIn message out there and said, hey, can I run ideas by you? I would travel to different conferences and stay in $50 Airbnbs. And I just talked to a lot of different customers. Now, the problem becomes a lot of them are going to tell you that you're so smart, it's a great idea, keep going, keep going. That is the biggest mistake if you listen to the false optimism. The number one question is, will you pay me today for this product? And how much will you pay me? And that's the question. And until I kept iterating and iterating and iterating, and if you won't pay me for this, what would you pay me for? Until I got kept iterating and somebody wrote me a check before the product even existed, that was the turning point for me. So that's what I mean when I say you don't have to get lucky. You can engineer the process and iterate. Now, I think that's a little bit different in consumer software versus enterprise software. I'm biased because I'm an enterprise software guy, just like you are, Rich, I think, as well. I think in consumer software, you got to get a little bit luckier, but I think in enterprise software, that's why I love it. You just have to work hard, and you can find a market.
So the idea of startup engineering, you took literally. I mean, this sounds like the scientific method applied to starting a company.
Oh yeah, I was methodical and religious about following that process. The one lesson I learned is, there are a lot of formal types of tools and templates to help you go through that. There's something called the lean canvas. There's, all these different guidelines. I found that overly focusing on these tools and templates will distract you and focus on the form over function. And so I followed the process, but the way I did it, the way I interviewed customers, the templates I used, I just did it the way it made sense to me. It wasn't overly rigid.
Did you have mentors? I mean, I saw the bookshelf that you presented. You clearly looked up to some people.
Yeah.
Anyone local that was particularly helpful to you?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think mentorship has been absolutely critical in my process. But what I would say is the way most people find a mentor, I think is wrong. If you have to go to somebody and say, "Will you be my mentor?" That's not going to be your mentor. It's the fundamentally wrong approach. What I found is that when I participated in these groups, I would go to places where people who want to mentor show up. And so TIE Atlanta, TIE was where I got all my early mentors, because that's where I would say successful entrepreneurs would participate. And I would participate in their programs, and whoever was speaking, whoever was running these different programs, part of the program is they assign you somebody to buddy up with. And so you can naturally build those relationships, and it's not forced. If you click with someone, great. If you don't, then it's fine. There are a couple lessons I learned there, though. Number one is that there are a lot of people that are going to try to give you advice. And the most important skill is what not to listen to versus what to listen to. Because you have to remember, everybody's advice is contextual to their experience. And very few people have the exact identical copy-paste experience that you're about to go through, and at the right time in the world and market that you're doing it. So contextualizing and not taking advice literally was a big learning for me. And the second was mentors are going to change over time, right? A mentor that's going to be valuable to help me to get from 1,500 employees and a $2.7 billion company to a $20 billion company is just fundamentally different than somebody who's going to help me to get from 0 to 1. And so what I learned is happening is mentors will turn into friends when you outgrow them. And you'll want to find ecosystems where you want to find new mentors. And as you mature and scale as a company, mentors really become more formal board members and advisors. And you want to choose your board members carefully, because at that level, Mark Benioff isn't going to be my mentor. He's going to want to be a board member, have equity in the company. And so it gets more formal over time as well.
So has Atlanta changed in terms of its ecosystem since you started the company?
I might be the wrong person to ask, because I was actually, for better or for worse, maybe it was a good idea or a bad idea, I tried to insulate myself from the startup ecosystem in Atlanta for two reasons. Number one, I felt like the startup incubators, the tech villages were all about doing a lot of small things. There was no multi-billion-dollar flagship IPO in the enterprise software world in Atlanta. So getting involved in that ecosystem, by default, you're going to get mentors and advisors that did small things and aren't thinking as big as you want to think. So I wanted to avoid that, number one. Number two is, they're doing beer Fridays and happy hours and ping pong tables and distracting your employees. So I wanted a really focused, disciplined culture where people were in it to go big, right? It was a grand slam, not a home run, not a double. And that's why I kind of insulated myself from the broader startup ecosystem. Now, that being said, if you just look at how many multi-billion-dollar enterprise software companies there are in Atlanta today, I can think of 5 off the top of my head that were started in the last 10 years, and I think that is new and unique. But I think what's really missing is the flagship software IPO platform company from Atlanta that's a horizontal platform solution that's broad and a big brand name. A lot of the IPOs and companies in Atlanta are like these niche financial services, healthcare tech, whatever it is. And I think that's still missing in Atlanta, that Silicon Valley has, that New York has. And hopefully we can be one of those types of companies.
Yeah, I gave a keynote at the TAG annual meeting. I think it was 2004. It was right after. I even forget who it was. The last $200 million software company left Atlanta in 2004, 2005. So I gave a keynote that was sort of saying we've got a lot of successful companies, but they're all tiny tiny companies. When do we get the next $200 million enterprise software company? And it takes a while to build that up.
It takes a lot to build it up, number one, but it takes too many founders and entrepreneurs, I think, in Atlanta would get $1 billion offer for their company and say, "Peace, I'm out. Let's take the money." And it's understandable, and it's understandable, but you need somebody bold enough and crazy enough to say no to that kind of offer. But I think consistently we're finding that the path for enterprise software companies in Atlanta is they sell. They just sell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope it's changing.
Yeah, for sure.
I heard, I don't know if this was associated with your time in Barcelona, but I heard you ran with the Bulls.
Yeah, I did. I'm a all or nothing kind of person, and if I'm going to do something, I want to go all in. So when I was in Barcelona, when in Spain, you run with the Bulls. So I went to Pamplona, and I ran with the Bulls. And the interesting thing that I didn't know, at the end of running with the Bulls, everything feeds into this arena. And then they close the doors and all the Bulls are in it. And most of the same people jump over the fence and go into the stands. I didn't really understand what I was doing. I stayed in the arena with maybe 50 other people, and a Bull charged me and just completely sent me flying. And luckily it was more, entertaining and an adventure because, the horn didn't get me. I was a skinny up guy where the horns went to either side of me. But that was a fun adventure for sure.
An adventure and a metaphor, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about your time at Tech. Who did you interact with? Who taught you? Was there anyone in particular that stands out that had an influence on your time here?
I had a lot of really great professors. Merrick, Merrick first I spent time with in Barcelona, like I mentioned. I only had one course with him, but he had started a company, Vala. He introduced me to this idea of startup engineering. And although I spent very little time with him, I don't even know that he knows how influential that was with me. And by the way, he was the first professor to ever not give me an A in my life as well. So, and I probably deserved much less than the I think B he gave me, because when you're studying abroad in Barcelona, school is not your top priority for sure.
Yeah.
And so he was really influential. I really enjoyed working with Ellen Zagura, Nick Feemster, and Russ Clark, really because they all had a focus on network security that was just so fascinating to me. And that's kind of where I got from my curriculum at Georgia Tech, from network security and devices, into my first job at AirWatch, which is all about networking and devices as well. That was really influential for me. But what I would say the most influential thing that I did at Tech was taking advantage of the broader opportunities in Atlanta and on campus. So I did Fresh GA my freshman year and built a lot of relationships and networks. I became an advisor to Fresh GA and learned how to run meetings, put together agendas, motivate people. I became the president of the Student Center and worked with the head of the Student Center on faculty to fundraise for a $250,000 bowling alley renovation. I overhauled how the Student Center did programs. I just had a lot of independence to think bold and big and go do that. So I found that really, really valuable to build my network And I think the mistake a lot of students at Georgia Tech make, I was in a fraternity as well, and the mistake I saw my peers make is that they would stay at the fraternity and party with their fraternity brothers, and you almost get brainwashed into having like blinders on, and then you talk trash about the other fraternities when, my approach was I'd go to everyone else's parties. I'd go to all these organizations, and you meet so many good friends and broaden your horizon. And that was really, really influential for me. I also think people lose sight on campus that there's a broad ecosystem in Atlanta. There are classes at Georgia State that do entrepreneurship classes. You can just go sit in and attend. That's where I heard Jim Beach. I just sat in on an MBA school class. I just walked into it. And so I just think people lose sight of how much there is. The fact that Georgia Tech is in the middle of a city is so awesome. UGA would never have anything like that. You're on an island. All you can do is go to a bar when you're at UGA. So yeah.
That it's interesting to hear you say that. We've started this new school of cybersecurity and privacy, and I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is that Atlanta is a platform. Lots of new ventures in the Atlanta area around the security and privacy space, and that's probably good advice for the school. I mean, we tend to look internally at our own internal processes and our students, but there are 40 colleges and universities in Metro Atlanta. That's probably the most in the country, and then so spreading your wings and looking outward, I think, is probably good advice for us as we build the school.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of the school, so what do you think? What do you think the school means?
Rich, when we talked a few weeks ago, I was so proud and just so happy to see "and privacy" in the name of the school. And I thought that showed such a thoughtfulness and understanding of the market opportunity for students in Atlanta. And I haven't seen anyone else do that. I mean, I've seen other schools do really niche privacy engineering things that don't scale to the real world. Cybersecurity and privacy are so important to be thought of together. Cybersecurity professional CISOs having a privacy skill set is so in demand right now. And I just think it's putting Atlanta and Georgia Tech at the focal point of where the recruiting talent and the industry contribution is going to come from. It's just having cybersecurity and privacy in the name of the school is going to force students to think about, why are those two words different and separate? Because not everybody understands why those are different things. Privacy has nothing to do with a data breach. Privacy is, what are you doing with the data you have? Forget about the breach. Why do you have that data? How is it being used? What decisions are being made on it? How is that impacting people's lives, societies? Are you having loan applications being automatically denied based on some sort of data that may or may not be factual or true? Are you explaining the algorithm transparency? Is it reinforcing biases? Are you serving up ads only to high net worth people and not providing discounts to low income people? Like it's so important, and that's just scratching the surface of what this means for society before the breach even happens. And then if all that data gets into a breach, all those same risks and bad outcomes can happen at a bigger scale, obviously, and that's cybersecurity. And I think it is so critical and so important, and there's just nothing like what I've seen that Rich, you're spearheading, and with Charles and everyone. So I don't know that the students really appreciate it yet, probably, but I think it's a huge service to the community, the industry, and to the school for sure.
So I'll tell you a secret. You were a student here when we formed the first schools in the college, and
I did
the
Threads.
school,
you pioneered that, yeah.
There we go. So the School of Interactive Computing had to be named, and the big discussion of the day was, what do we name the school? We didn't call it Interactive Computing, but what do we name this new school? And the suggestions were all, why don't we name it graphics and visualization and AI and human factors and I put out a memo that said there are going to be no ands or ampersigns. Name of this school. So here I find myself, leading a school with an and in it, with an and in it. And you're right. It would not have made sense. It would not have been the same kind of launch if we had left privacy out of it. So rules are meant to be broken, I guess. But this one, I think you're exactly right. The context, we use cybersecurity as a catch-all for lots of things. To make privacy explicit, I think was a definite statement.
Yeah, it's just like I said, it's just such a thoughtful. That to me is what makes this so unique and so compelling in the market. Because the core cybersecurity skills, you can get a CISSP and you can go grab a job and it's commoditized, but that, the unintentional consequences when you do security is it requires a ton of monitoring. And without that balance, I think it's dangerous. So
yeah. Well, congratulations on the company. It's really a great story. I know we've got some. Jen, are you there? I know we've got some questions that have been coming from the audience.
Yeah. So I think one of the first ones was how do you protect your company against litigation when an enterprise customer ends up being out of compliance, hit with government regulation and sanctions?
So the short answer is contract. So before anybody is allowed to even log into our software, they have to sign a contract. Sometimes it's as simple as a click-through EULA that they don't even read, they just click it. But with most enterprise companies, it's a negotiated T's and C's. It is probably the most horrible, frustrating, value-detracting task that all enterprise software companies go through. You spend countless hours of senior people's time negotiating these horrible contracts when you're always going to land in the same place, but your customer always wants to argue and negotiate it anyway. And the bottom line is there's a clause in a contract clause called the liability clause. And it essentially says your liability is limited to, the extent the customer paid for the software, and we waive all liability for regulatory fines. And in the market, it's pretty accepted because everybody knows a software technology doesn't make you compliant. The people and the process that you use to implement the technology and how you operationalize it in your organization is what makes you compliant. And so it's a tool in the toolkit. And so that's how most enterprise software companies operate.
So a lot of the others are kind of switching from specific success to the company and more your own personal experience. So what courses at GT really drove your passion and success? And I know you mentioned, some of the stuff that Merrick was doing. So I don't know if there are any specific courses that really had an impact.
I love the networking courses. I thought those were just so interesting. I also took a cryptography? How do you crack codes and algorithms and things like that with Merrick? That was super interesting. And then I think what I don't want to be lost in everybody is I took an accounting class in the entrepreneurship curriculum, and man, did I hate it. But I have gotten so much value out of that course because you can't run a business without understanding financials. You're just blind. And it's almost like, you can't build a good program without understanding algorithms and object-oriented code and the foundations of data structures and things like that. I don't want anybody to underestimate the power of a strong financial background as well. And I think that was out of my comfort zone. Like I said, I hated the class, but I really value the fact that I took it.
We're seeing it go the other way too. So students in business or students in other parts of Georgia Tech in design wanting into cybersecurity courses. And it's a you may have hated the accounting course, but it's a big hurdle for a non-technical student to get into a computing course.
I'll tell you, it wasn't as bad as what was it? The technical writing. It was like
there you go.
101.
Speaking of
did I
impenetrable,
hate that class.
The students still hate technical writing to this day. Nothing's changed in over a decade. So kind of staying in this whole like idea of having that, background in accounting and the impact that it had. There's kind of two questions around this. So first, would you say from your own personal experience that there's kind of a threshold of personal financial security before really kind of taking that leap into starting your own company or
I think it's hard for me to say because my answer is I get so frustrated hearing people talk about needing financial security and all this salary and all this stuff before they quit their job and go big. When I was never in a position that I was going to be out on the streets. So it's hard for me to tell people that when everybody's in a different individual situation. What I saw is that I always thought, what is the worst case scenario? Okay. The worst case scenario is that I lose all my money. I can't pay my mortgage and I go live with some friends. And it is easy for anybody with a Georgia Tech background to get a job. I mean, if you are like reasonably like a good, good academically and hardworking, you can get a job. It's and maybe it's not going to pay as much as you want. And maybe you have to compromise on title and this and that, but I could always go get a job. So maybe I was sleeping on someone's couch for a few weeks. Maybe I had to bump some money off my friends or family or parents, but I just knew I was never going to be out on the streets in the short term. So I just didn't see it as, I saw the risk of not starting a company. And I always had a whiteboard in my room that I would set, what is my goal that I want by the time I'm 40, 60, 80? I always said, I want to be able to be an entrepreneur and have this type of impact. And I want to do it at a certain age so I can enjoy it. And so I always backed into, in order for me to get there, I always said, I need to quit my job by February 2016. Otherwise, I don't have enough time to hit the milestones I want. And I at least want a chance. Maybe it's not going to happen, but I at least want a chance. And I pretty much nailed the date on when I quit, but it wasn't luck. I engineered my steps to get there. I backed into the process. That's why I say if the risk of not doing it is much more significant than the risk of doing it. And the trap of, I want a certain size house for my kids and family in the short term, you're compromising on being able to fundamentally change the trajectory of your life, your legacy, your children's life, in order to just have a slightly bigger house in the short term and a little bit more work-life balance. I just, you can tell I'm a little bit, it's a pet issue for me and something I get asked a lot about. And I just think you got to do it. You got to do it. And there's just not many chances you're going to have in your life, maybe 2, 3, to do that first company and screw up and still be able to do another company and screw up. And you also got to look at what's your time horizon and how many screw ups do you have before you got to go get a real job, because you are going to screw up many times. And so you don't want to wait too long and then you only got one screw up left and then, you burn it. So I think there's a lot that goes into it.
The difference, a difference between Atlanta and Silicon Valley is that in Silicon Valley there are lots of people doing that. So I mean, you can sit at a coffee shop or Il Fornaio and Palo Alto and spend the entire day kind of doing that kind of networking. And until recently, that was difficult to do in Atlanta. People were spread out. Maybe we should be playing a role to help make that easier.
Look, I just don't think the awareness is out there, Rich. I think you're exactly right. The worst place to start a company today is Silicon Valley. Both the political environment, the cost of living, the access to talent, the demands of talent, the lack of loyalty, where everybody's trying to get poached by Google and leave or whatever. You don't have those problems in Atlanta. We ran circles over all of our Silicon Valley competitors, and we did it at a fraction of the cost with industry's lowest turnover at massive scale. And I never had to take a connecting flight because you got the Atlanta airport. It's people underestimate the power. And when you're trying to build an international business in Europe, the 5-hour time difference from Atlanta, manageable. 8 hours is a little bit too much from Silicon Valley. And
Yeah.
Europe is a better market than Asia. So, yes, Silicon Valley is better for Asia, but that's usually the third or fourth priority, not your first. So I do think there needs to be a lot more awareness and evangelism that Silicon Valley is dead. It's the last place you want to go right now. And a lot of the big Silicon Valley investors and New York investors are specifically looking for Atlanta companies. So I would say the formula for me was start in Atlanta, but raise money from Silicon Valley and New York. Maybe to say something controversial, and maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'll say it too much. I would never raise money from an Atlanta VC because they're just not the caliber and experience, and who your investors are is critical. It's not just money. Money's the least valuable thing they're going to give you. So I think there's a way to do it in Atlanta and still take the benefits of what those other cities offer.
I'm glad you raised that point. I had it on my list to ask you about raising money, because that's one of the hurdles that a founder has to get over. And it's not a natural thing, especially for people that are trained in technology. Did it come naturally for you to go out and raise money?
So I don't know that maybe it came naturally, but I would say it took a lot of hard work and practice as well. I was very lucky in finding business partners early on that knew how to grow an enterprise software company at scale and go big, and didn't force me to raise a bunch of small rounds and meet short-term milestones. I was looking to raise $5 million. What I got was way more than that. And they said, go big and don't worry about short-term milestones. So I was very lucky in how I found that. But what I would say is, as an entrepreneur, you have to get yourself out of the mindset of owning your whole company. You got to look at, are you increasing the per share price and the value? And so number one is, it's okay to raise money and give equity to investors. And that is an incredibly valuable thing if it's the right investor. And you should evaluate what skill sets and competitive disadvantages do you have as a company, and look for that in your investors, and look for the actual dollar amount last. The dollar amount you can get from anybody. And if you can't get it from anybody, look, there's so many investors out there and so much cash. There's a line out the door for people to give you money. And if you don't have a business. It's an all or nothing type of market. All the investors want you, or none of them do. And so, keep pivoting and finding the right idea until you have the line out the door. And the second thing I'll say is, give employees equity. Give employees equity, and it's going to change the game for the motivation level and the types of caliber of people you find. And I think too many founders worry about, how much percentage do I own, not how big can I make it, and do we all win? And do we create an ecosystem where instead of one person making money, hundreds and thousands of people make money, and what you're able to do with that network and the good that you did for your city, the community, you're going to be able to start the next company, the next company, and the next company. And I think people underestimate that. I mean, there are classic stories in Atlanta, very well-known entrepreneurs that have sold their companies for $100 million and gave their employees zero. And I think it's a damn shame And again, that's something that's good about the Silicon Valley culture. They do a lot of equity for employees. And I think that's something Atlanta companies need to adopt more as well.
And I mean, the history of Atlanta is bound up with the struggle against inequality of all kinds. So this is a natural place to make that kind of business transformation.
Yeah.
So interesting question here from I guess a cybersecurity master's student who's looking for a project idea for his practicum in privacy. What kinds of things do you think are just over the horizon that would make good graduate student projects in the privacy area?
So one of the most interesting topics in the market today is around data ethics in AI. And how do you test for algorithmic bias and discrimination in AI? And it is a major, major topic that is unsolved. And there's some interesting academic projects and prototypes. And like, how do you build when somebody's coding in AI, how do you know if the data set has an inherent bias in it? Almost all of them do. And then how do you build a test harness that automatically tests and adjusts? And what are those thresholds? What's good? What's okay? Is a little bit of bias okay? Like, that's a strange question to ask, and I think that's such an interesting problem that's so critical when AI is taking over so many different industries, and the risk of getting it wrong and how that's going to set the entire world back decades in terms of bias and just how people operate is, I think, a scary thought. And that's where I would like to see a lot of master's research done.
Yeah. So the thing that you run up against, of course, is that everything is based on popularity, and so there's no guarantee that people aren't going to be biased in who they choose to associate with. Hubs and spokes work that way. Do you need a human being in the loop to do that, or do you think that there are algorithmic approaches?
I think it's tough. So I think the general thinking is there should be a human in the loop, but that also is introducing bias as well. Like, these are so complex sometimes that a big challenge is just explainability of algorithms. You can't explain what it's doing sometimes when it's learning and evolving. And so, an interesting thing on your point, Rich, is that the GDPR actually has written in there that a fundamental right for people is that they should be able to object to automated decision making and have a human intervene and review it. So the general philosophy from the regulatory process is exactly what you just said and described. I applied for a loan online, automatically rejected. Why? I should be able to dispute it and have a human review the facts and object to it. And that is a fundamental principle in the law.
So there's a book a couple years old now, but still pretty recent, by Paul Doherty from Accenture, where he talks about the changes in responsibility, social responsibility, business responsibility, and ethics that AI pose, and that's really one of the things that's foremost on his mind, that decision makers kind of sacrifice agency to the algorithm, and then you remove yourself from the responsibility. Well, it wasn't my decision; it was the algorithm that said to do this.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm just kind of we're running a little short on time. I want to make sure we get some questions. You mentioned that finding a business partner is hard. Can you talk more about how you found a business partner?
My advice is always, if you want to start a company, don't start a company. Find the company that you want to be like, that has the brands, the people, and the leaders you want to be like. And ideally find one that's a little bit earlier stage, but has the right leaders with the right track record and reputation that, you'll know it's the right team and people when you see people from previous companies that they worked with join that company. That means they had a good reputation, they took care of people. If you find a company where it's an entrepreneur that's been part of another company or business, whether it's as a leader or a founder, but nobody from that company came over to help them, that's a huge red flag.
Interesting.
So, I would say I got lucky a little bit in stumbling upon AirWatch, and that just was there. But now that I understand why that environment was successful for me, that's what I always advise people to look for. And when you realize that you're not in a company like that, hit the eject button. Just hit the eject button. And my business partners, 13 out of the 16 people on my executive team, I worked with before. I pretty much recruited the entire executive team from AirWatch. And the two gentlemen who had founded AirWatch, and before that they had founded Manhattan Associates, I wasn't an executive at AirWatch. I started right out of school. I was a jack of all trades, and I had a good reputation with the management team. When I quit my job at AirWatch, I didn't ask for help. I didn't want to be the guy that went to them and said, I know you guys made a lot of money on AirWatch, now come help me. I just wanted to do it on my own. And so I started looking at raising money. I got office space. I started the company. I did it all on my own. When the guys who founded AirWatch found out I was doing that, they found out I had quit my job. And one of them happened to be in town and said, Kabir, let's go meet up. They had to pull it out of me what I was doing. I wasn't talking about it, and they had to pull it out of me, and they realized how far I had gotten on my own. And I said, look, my only ask, if you want to offer to help, is when I go pitch to a VC, just do a reference call for me and tell them the real deal. And that's when they said, excuse me, yes, we'll do that. But here's an alternative. We'll go in on the business with you. Sorry about that. So yeah, that's how I found my business partners.
So not prompted by your coughing, we have a question that says, how is OneTrust handling the pandemic?
I've got a tickle in my throat. So excuse me. But we've done well. The pandemic has caused problems in risk management, business continuity, employee privacy and employee monitoring, and massive cloud migrations due to work from home that create huge privacy and personal data problems. So from a revenue perspective, we've hit all our targets. We didn't know we would. We thought that the pandemic might have a bigger impact, but we've been very lucky. We did move all of our offices to remote. We're a cloud company anyway. We don't have a corporate network. Everything's in the cloud. We don't have phones on our desks. Everybody has a cell phone. So it didn't really matter. I would say work from home is a horrible thing. And that's a controversial statement. I believe all my competitors should implement a work from home policy so I can beat them, because I don't believe you can be a number one market leading company moving at the pace we are when you have to schedule a Zoom meeting for 30 minutes to get a 2-minute point across you can walk by someone's desk. The inefficiencies are horrendous. The lack of accountability is horrendous. The distractions are horrendous. Despite all that, we've hit all our targets, but it's unnecessarily frustrating. It's unnecessarily wasteful. I think you can build a great number 3, number 4, number 5 company working from home. I think you can have great work-life balance, but if your goal is to be the number one dominant market leader, you have to look for every 1% edge you can get, and that's one of them. So I think it's been difficult from that perspective. I can't wait to get back in the office. That being said, all of our offices are remote right now and around the world. So the other problem is, as a leader, it's probably the time period I've learned the most about, for sure. I mean, you learn that every single person has their own, their political beliefs that feed into this, their family situations, there's economic and social situations. And you don't realize that there's so many different highly personal individual opinions and situations. And it's very difficult to run a company when you have to, you can't have a broad policy. Some people want to work from the office because they don't have a healthy home environment. Some people, if you tell them, if I stand up on all hands and say, the office is open for people to come in, they're going to be horrified and they're going to be saying, what kind of irresponsible person are you? There are people dying. And so it's an extremely challenging environment when it's just so deeply personal and individual. Man, have I learned a lot this year, especially going through the racial unrest in the middle of it, the economic issues, political issues. It is, man, any CEO in today's environment, I'll tell you, is learning and growing for sure.
So the culture of the company is likely changing. I mean, what's the evolutionary path for the culture of OneTrust? I mean, aside from size, all the other things that you mentioned are forces that affect every company, and I'm just interested in what effect it's had on you.
So there's some parts of your culture that you want to protect for your entire company life cycle, just really aggressively. So things like your work ethic, things like, simple things like note-taking is part of our culture. You just get so much efficiency. You want to instill that in people, how they can be efficient, how they can get good return on their time. And this cultural value we always call hate to lose. You have to obsess over your losses and not celebrate the JV trophy and not falsely celebrate things that weren't true wins all the way. So you celebrate a go live, but then the customer has a bug in the software a week after go live. I don't want to hear anybody celebrating a go live. I want to hear them celebrating 30 days after go live when everything was stable. So setting the milestone and celebrating the right success, not a premature success. Those are things in our culture and our DNA that every single employee goes through a boot camp, is taught about, thinks about, I reinforce in our all hands. There are other parts of your culture that is going to change. So for example, you cannot expect your 1500th employee to care as much about your company than your first 20 employees. Your first 20 employees are going to bleed, your company colors. They're all in. They don't care about work-life balance. They want to go hit it hard. It's their company. At some point, that changes. And even your 100th, 200th, 500th employee isn't going to feel like that. And it's not fair for me to expect someone to feel like that. How do we keep those people that love that about our company excited while creating an environment that has more work-life balance, that has more flexibility, that has, paid paternity leave for dads, things like that, if you ask me when I started the company if we'd ever do those things, I'd say, heck no. But now we do yoga 3 times a day in the middle of the day. And I'm like, guys, go do yoga. Because you realize that these things, it's just a different population that matters. We didn't do titles until we were 1,000 people. We did no titles. That breaks when you're 1,000 people. It just breaks. So, those are the things that are going to evolve over time. And look, as a founder and CEO, you've got to constantly, at a fast growing company, what you got to be thinking is every decision you made 6 months ago is obsolete. You're a fundamentally different company every 6 months with the types of people you want, the culture, the drive, the market opportunity, and you have to not be afraid of just changing your mind 6 months later.
Do people grow within OneTrust? I realize that you haven't gone through many generations of employees or leaders, but what are your thoughts on that? Are you growing your own leaders? Is it a mixed strategy?
Oh yeah. So we promote heavily from within. Majority of our leaders promoted from within. Very small percentage of leaders we bring in from the outside, and it's because there are very few companies in the world that were number one in their market and growing at such a demanding pace, which we have a very specific culture. a lot of people just aren't going to enjoy being OneTrust employees. And the people that do, there's no place else like it. They just love it. I mean, it's so fulfilling, so rewarding. It accelerates their career by a decade. It's compelling. But if somebody's looking for a 9-to-5 job, great work-life balance, in a place where, you know, you hug each other and high five every day, that's not what it takes to be number one. And so we're more successful hiring promoting people within because they understand that drive and motivation, rather than hiring someone from outside and then trying to untrain them from the last 10 years of their career to not do things the way SAP did. Don't do things the way IBM did. Heck, don't do things the way Google did. So that's been very successful for us. And also, the type of person I like to hire and promote is the person that doesn't have the experience doing what I want them to do. If I always hired people that had experience, we wouldn't be anywhere at the scale we had. People that have done exactly the job I want them to do aren't going to be motivated and excited to prove it and earn it and push forward. They're just going to want to be managers, not leaders. And they're not going to want to be it's not as fun the second time to do the same thing. You want to delegate more. And so we've also found that even when we hire from outside, we hire the person that is one level below what we want them to do, so that they want it so bad. It's the opportunity for them, and it's just so exciting, and they're going to push hard to make it happen. That's the formula that's really worked for us.
Well, great story. We're looking forward to working with OneTrust in the new school. We've got a point of view in the school that practical experience is important, and internships and projects are going to be key to success at Georgia Tech in the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy, and we hope to see OneTrust there with us to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're all in. Our CTO, Blake Brannon, I think is on your advisory board. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's great for the community. One thing I think I told you last time we talked was so at OneTrust, we contractually require anybody that joins our company in a customer-facing role to get 2 industry standard privacy certifications as a condition of their employment. These are difficult exams that usually lawyers take and has like a 60% fail rate. And because we've mandatory made it a prereq, number one, it pre-screens people who aren't up for the challenge, but also it's made Atlanta the #1 city in the world for the most certified privacy professionals. And I think that, tied with the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy, is just such a unique foundation that if any other school in America tried to do this, I don't think they're as successful as we're going to be doing in this ecosystem. And it's not just us. There are so many brilliant cybersecurity professionals in Atlanta that, you know, Atlanta's a town that commercial real estate and then fintech. I think cybersecurity is getting up there, and I think we can be the de facto destination if we're successful. That's what we should set our sights on.
That sounds like a great aspiration. Jen, do we have anyone else?
I mean, we have a lot of really great questions, but we are already past time, so I don't want to keep anyone too much longer. But thank you so much, Kabir, for joining us. Rich, for taking time out of your evening as well to host tonight's discussion. We're really excited I could have listened to this for another hour or so. But also I'm questioning where I went wrong during my time as a student at Georgia Tech.
You didn't go wrong.
Different paths for everyone. But thank you both so much for joining us. This was just absolutely great. And for those of you who are joining us who are current students or alumni or friends of the college, we hope you enjoyed tonight's discussion.